The AI market is rapidly discovering that better models don't guarantee better outcomes. The next competitive battleground is context and how effectively AI systems understand the relationships between data, people, processes, and business objectives. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practicing and principal analyst for the AppDev practice, and this is the AppDev Angle. Today, I'm joined by Molham from RelationalAI, the team that is talking and taking direct aim at the gaps between enterprise decision intelligence and the market. Molham, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Always great to have you on. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and introduce RelationalAI?
All right. I'm Molham. I'm the CEO and founder of RelationalAI. I've been in and around the enterprise decision intelligence for many years, and we've been working diligently on helping enterprises close what's now being called the AI value gap, the gap between what models can do and the value that's actually realized from them, and trying to do that for decision intelligence in the way that many people are doing for business intelligence.
Well, Molham, there's a lot of buzz in the market, a lot of discussions, a lot of kind of conversations being had. Enterprise AI market is entering a phase where competitive differentiated and shifting away from model sizing towards contextual intelligence now. We see that happening. But organizations are shifting and making significant investments in generative AI platforms, and many continue to struggle with governance, accuracy, integration complexities, and improving measurability for business outcomes. This has really been a challenge. So we see the growing interest that what we've talked about on briefings and conversations with RelationalAI's approach and providing richer context through graphs, through semantic relationships and business-aware data architectures, right? That's really a big factor. But over the next 12 to 24 months or so, we're seeing the market is likely to reward vendors that can combine AI capabilities with contextual messaging, reasoning, governance, and operational scalability that really got to empower enterprises to move beyond those isolated co-pilots towards trusted production-grade AI systems. So, Molham, let's jump right in. There's a lot to kind of think about here. We set the context, no pun intended, but we set the idea around what's happening on this podcast here. There's a lot to think about, from BI systems to AI systems to DI systems, and they're all kind of interwound and intertwined, but nobody seems to have a good relationship on how it all works together. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of energy going into this. I just a couple of days ago, I think Anthropic put out a blog about data agents and the importance of semantics to drive, to get them to work and to drive value from the Anthropic models. I was at the Snowflake Summit last week, and man, was context hot as a topic, and there are a lot of people who are starting to get into that game again, becoming, I think, sort of widely understood that these models need context to work in the same way that humans need the same. So what is context here? Historically, context has included data in database systems that people data clouds, that people have all their enterprise data and sometimes external data. But more and more people are realizing the importance of semantics. Like, most of the data in there is computed somehow. And how is it computed? And how does the business think about certain concepts and certain important relationships and derived relationships, like, how do I think about profit, or how do I think about effectiveness or risk and things like that. So so I think the world accepts the importance of concepts, and even the frontier labs are now saying you need context and semantics to have our models be effective. So where will we go beyond that? And so our view is that we're all there, but I think the context and the semantics need to be executable. So we need tools beyond just SQL, because SQL cannot express and run everything that we need. And then we need to be able to also take these models and train them in a way where they know more about our business. So it's not like every time we ask them a question, we have to give them all the context from scratch again. So these two ideas are ideas that we want to push forward. And I think they're essential especially for like high value questions that drive decision-making and decision intelligence.
Yeah, Molham, I think that it's spot on. I think that there's, the focus around ROI, around understanding where the data is coming, what it's providing to the organizations. Many organizations are continuing to invest in larger models and more AI initiatives, but yet business value often remains difficult to realize, as you were kind of talking about here. When we start thinking about the context and the value of the data. So let me ask you this: why does AI value gap exist today, and why isn't it simply adding more model power to really solve the problem? Like, what's the issue there? Like, why can't we just throw more energy at it to make it work, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a very interesting question. I've been thinking about this myself. If you look at sort of where Gen AI and LLMs have had the most product market fit, it's really in the coding space. Okay, and it's basically the code is the context, and it's in the form of text. So these models consume both sort of designs and declarations of intent and code, and then produce code and maybe more designs and things like that. So the input is basically textual and the output is textual. The other place where they might be getting some traction is in the kind of co-work context, right? Where again, you're consuming documents and producing documents, or in the design space where they're, again, consuming things that are design specs, wireframes, et cetera, and producing those types of things. The value gap, it really exists in things that are agents that really drive your business. Like does anyone really have agents driving their supply chain? Does anyone really have agents deciding who to fire or hire in a company? Does anyone really have agents deciding how to price products, how to market? I think there's very little evidence that that's happening at scale. Okay, and so how do we do that? How do we get language models to help us there? What's interesting about that is when humans do that work, they interact with systems and tools that consume relational data. They look at sort of the systems of record and look at sort of what transactions have happened historically and who did what to whom in a kind of a structured sense, and they produce relational data. And when they consume and produce that, that's usually run through some kind of application logic, business logic that lives in code. Okay, and so I think it's very important for us to create context that is native to the paradigm of the data, the inputs and outputs of these systems. And that's not text, that's not a markdown, and that has to be executable. That has to kind of be able to model aspects of your business and run them and predict and prescribe and do all sorts of things that you don't typically do in a BI context.
Yeah, and well, I mean, you touched on this, but I think it's important to kind of double click on this. Context has become one of the most discussed topics in enterprise AI, right? We're talking about that. You mentioned it last week. You saw a lot of it. There's a lot of buzz in the market. It seems to be picking up steam and momentum. But what's missing from today's AI stack when it comes to context? And I guess I'll ask, how does relational AI help bridge that gap? Because you have that insights and the information to use, and you're providing that context in itself. So how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, again, our thing is, it's in the name, relational AI. And so we're all about structured data and the systems that produce, and manage structured data, typically relational databases and applications that have expressed some kind of business logic that computes, the stuff that you find in a relational database. And if you look at, again, how people run their businesses, okay, it's run in these type of structured systems. And until the context becomes native to those types of systems, so it expresses and captures and executes things that consume and produce relational data and are also, have the semantics of the application logic that are modeling some aspect of your business, I don't think we can provide the models enough context for them to help us actually make decisions and to be part of a team of humans and agents that push a business forward. Okay, so that's really essential. It's really in the name. It's the relational in the AI, and the context has to be relational for this kind of stuff. And it's important that people understand that, because again, putting it all in sort of text and documents is just not enough. That's not what a human would do, and that's not, you'd be handicapping an agent if you don't empower them similarly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that makes some sense around why you want to understand the information that you're receiving differently in in different contexts, and so to speak. Let's talk about a little bit kind of different approach here. When we start talking about understanding the data, and we start talking about the AI initiatives, there's a whole slew of things that are kind of being discussed. Tokenomics are out there, right? Like what does that mean? How much cost is going to be around? But as enterprises scale in AI deployments, the cost around the infrastructure, inferencing, and operations are becoming a major concern. It is a board level conversation, right? This is happening because of the costs associated with AI. People say AI and cloud are similar. Well, yeah, they're similar, but very different, because AI is touching everybody, right? And that means that boards are spending a lot of money on these initiatives. So how should organizations think about the economics of AI, and where does relational AI help greater value, efficiencies, and on the ROI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think cost is a thing that started becoming more and more visible, and people are starting to blow through their budgets, very quickly, in a way that starts to become problematic. I actually we work very closely with one of our customers at AT&T, and they talk publicly about this. They I think consume 27 billion tokens a day. Okay. And so I think you have to manage that in a variety of ways. So I come back to context. I think that's fundamental. Having the right kind of context that very quickly can be, guides agents to kind of look at the right information and not have to wade through all the wrong information, burning tokens unnecessarily. I think that's very important. I think having the right tools is very important. Like we couldn't, in a BI or analytics context, you can't imagine not using a SQL engine as a tool for the agent. Okay, so if I ask a question like, what was the profit on sales of smartphone accessories 2 quarters ago in the Northeast, you're not going to have the language model go through row by row in your entire database and actually try to sum up all those records. That would be likely wrong and prohibitively expensive. And you would basically train your agent to kind of run the SQL query that answers that question. But if you're trying to make a decision, about like, hey, how to price smartphone accessories to make more money or maximize profit 2 quarters from now in the Southeast, again, you can't just expect the agent to do that like by analyzing everything row by row. You give it more tools, and these tools have to be efficient. You don't sort of have it like try to write a Python program for everything. You can give it tools for prediction. You can give it tools for solving and goal seeking, because you're trying to set a price point in an optimal way. You can give it tools to understand customer dynamics and communities, okay, like graph reasoning tools. You can give it tools to express business logic, like your profit, what you mean by profit, using rules and so on. So tools are really fundamental. The right kind of tools, the right kind of abstractions are really fundamental to component of keeping your costs down, because otherwise it's going to have to kind of do it on its own or write really expensive large programs. And then the last part I'll touch on very quickly is, instead of sending all that context all the time, can you actually continue to train these models, right? So you have smaller models that are open weight, which makes them cheaper. And then can I give them more of this context and post-train them so that they start to retain in their weights the information about my business, so that they don't have to always start from scratch. So the combination of efficient relational context with the right kinds of tools that work on relational data, and then the right kind of system that uses this ontology that you're building to kind of model your business to as an RL gym, as sometimes people call it, to produce training data that you can use to post-train models.
So that the training data that's produced, the information that's provided, the metrics that are there, it's important to understand that from a cost perspective. But the industry has really shifted and has largely centered on models that are performance and benchmark centric, right? This is what it's kind of a mix, right? You end up having the metrics of tools and understanding it and building it. But as we look over the next 6 to 12 months here, right, that we're looking at, half a year or a year out, I know that's almost an eternity in AI, but still, where do you see AI discourse shifting. What roles will context and relational play in the next wave of innovation? Because again, this ties back to ROI. It's not just building and innovating and trying and burning tokens. It's more about like, okay, what are we getting for this result?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's talking about closing the AI gap, right? And everybody, and Anthropic and OpenAI and the big sort of frontier model providers really care about this, because if they can't keep the revenue growth going, they have to fund, very expensive businesses, and so they need to deliver value to customers, who then will pay them for that value. And there's only so much value that they can get from delivering software engineering type benefit. So there's a lot of interest in closing this, and everyone recognizes that these models on their own without context don't work. And then people are starting to come to this idea that the context has to go beyond Markdown, has to be executable, and has to be native to the paradigm of the data. And so I think this is like, fundamental, to anything moving forward in terms of creating value in the enterprise. I do think that there are a few things that are less widely accepted that I think will be important, which is, even the frontier model companies are starting to talk about this. Like Anthropic will tell you, hey, don't use Opus for everything, or don't use our biggest models for everything. Use Sonnet, use a smaller model, and then when it gets stuck, it can call the bigger model. Okay, you see NVIDIA now starting to release all sorts of open weight models to kind of try to help people manage the cost of this. So in order to close this gap, the models have to be effective enough, and they have to be cost effective. They have to be inexpensive enough for them to be deployable. And so that's where I think the next 18 months will go.
Yeah, I like that response. I'll frame it up a little different. I would say $1 is not $1, it's not $1, right? I mean, basically the dollar for innovation is not the same as $1 for production. And
Yep.
if you're driving production that's driving towards revenue, that dollar's worth more than, one would say that dollar's worth more than innovation, but you need to innovate in order to make the production work, right? So it's kind of a full circle, a full life cycle there. I think that enterprise leaders are moving from AI experimentation to production, right? Think about it from the perspective of what practical steps should they be taking today to operationalize AI successfully? And then I would ask, Molham, how does relational AI fit into that strategy? Because this is, I will almost want to say it's a crawl, walk, run approach, where organizations are trying things from AI and experimenting on things for AI. But once they get into production, they have to move quickly in order to start understanding that ROI. Is that a fact? Is that true, or is that?
Yes. Yeah, I think that people have to make the investments in the context, in the, and all of that. So, relational AI, again, as the name suggests, is sort of all about creating context for humans and agents to drive better decision making. And for us, in order to kind of drive decision making, we need to go beyond the kind of context, the kind of semantics that people have for business intelligence. Okay, so it's really the stuff that historically we've had to write applications to solve, like supply chain management, merchandising, fraud detection, all the stuff that falls in the decision intelligence category, and all the stuff that you've written applications for. So we have an ontology, a relational ontology that's data cloud native, that works with relational data, that's instantiated as relational data, and that lets you basically take all the semantics that lives in the database and lives in documents and lives in code and express them in an ontology that becomes basically a model of your business. And that then can be powered by a variety of tools and reasoners that let you go beyond what SQL can do for prediction, for prescription, for graphs, for rules. So you can get all the stuff that lived in the applications in there, or as much of it as you need. And then we have that ability to use all of that as an RL gym to generate training data, so that you can, if you want to, go use, especially if you want to manage costs and drive sort of better effectiveness, post-train open weight models with that data, so that you get better results. Okay, all of that is available today and in production at some of the world's largest companies, and starting to have material impact on those businesses.
Yeah, no, it's definitely super exciting times we're in right now with this, because it's things are moving very fast. And I guess before we wrap along, where would the listeners go to learn more about what you and the team's doing and where should they go?
Yeah, relational.ai, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can email us. I think this information is on our website. So www.relational.ai is the best place to go.
Awesome. Well, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
And a big thank you to everyone who's tuned in. We do appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode. But we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talent shaping the future of application development. So whether you're deploying at the edge, building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. So be sure to follow us on social if you have any thoughts, questions, or just want to connect. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.